I used to believe that silence was the sound of peace. I grew up in a house where silence meant everyone was content, where the quiet hum of the air conditioner and the soft clink of silverware during Sunday brunch were the rhythms of a life well lived. My name is Wilder, and for 32 years, I thought I knew exactly what my world was built on. I thought I knew who my father was, who my mother was, and most importantly, who I was sleeping next to every night. But I was wrong. Silence isn't always peace. Sometimes, silence is the sound of a fuse, burning down toward a mountain of dynamite. Sometimes, silence is the most terrifying lie of all. Before I tell you about the night my life shattered, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had that tiny nagging itch in the back of your brain? That instinctual voice that whispers, something isn't right, even when everything looks perfect on the surface? Maybe it's a look that lasts a second too long, or a scent that doesn't belong in your house. If you've ever felt that, tell me in the comments. I need to know if I was just blind, or if we all try to ignore the truth until it's staring us in the face. And if you're new here, please subscribe. It helps me share these stories that are usually kept behind closed doors. My life with Cassidy felt like a dream. She was the girl next door in every sense, blonde, bright eyed, and always wearing a smile that could melt the coldest winter. We lived in a beautiful suburb just outside the city, the kind of place where people prune their hedges into perfect rectangles and wave to their neighbors every morning. We were the golden couple. My father, Pierce, lived only 10 minutes away in the grand estate where I grew up. He was a man of stature, a retired architect who built half the skyline in this city. He was my hero, and my mother, Genevieve, was the glue that held it all together, elegant, poised, and obsessed with the family's reputation. The cracks didn't start with a bang. They started with a scent. It was a rainy Tuesday, about 3 months ago. I had been away on a business trip in Chicago and decided to surprise Cassidy by taking an earlier flight home. I wanted to see her face light up when I walked through the door. I had a bouquet of lilies in one hand and my suitcase in the other. When I entered the foyer, the house was dark. That wasn't unusual. It was 2 p.m., and she was usually out at the gym or meeting her friends for lunch. But the air felt heavy. And then I smelled it. It was the scent of expensive cedarwood tobacco and a hint of old-fashioned bay rum. It was my father's scent. He's the only person I know who still uses that specific custom-blended aftershave. I figured he must have dropped by to help Cassidy with the leaky faucet she had mentioned. I called out her name, but there was no answer. I walked toward the kitchen, and that's when I saw it, a glass of amber liquid sitting on the counter. Bourbon, my father's favorite brand. There were two glasses, actually. One had a faint smudge of peach-colored lipstick on the rim, Cassidy's shade. My heart did a strange little skip, but I pushed the thought away. They're just talking, Wilder, I told myself. He's like a father to her. Don't be that guy. I walked upstairs to drop my bags, and the door to the guest bedroom at the end of the hall was cracked open. I don't know why I went there instead of our master bedroom. Maybe it was the silence. It wasn't the peaceful silence I was used to. It was a thick, a suffocating quiet. I pushed the door open just a few inches. The bed was unmade. My father's coat was draped over a chair, and there, glinting on the nightstand right next to a half-empty bottle of water, was a small gold hoop. It was the earring I had given Cassidy for our third anniversary, the pair she claimed she had lost at the park a week ago. I felt a cold sensation wash over my scalp, trailing down my spine like ice water. I didn't burst in. I didn't scream. I stood there in the hallway, the lilies still in my hand, feeling like an intruder in my own home. My brain started performing these frantic gymnastics, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe she left it there while cleaning. Maybe they were just resting. But the coat, the bourbon, the lipstick. It was a mosaic of betrayal, and the picture it formed was grotesque. I heard the garage door open. My first instinct was to run, to hide, to not be seen. I ducked into the master bathroom and closed the door just as I heard Cassidy's laughter echoing from the garage into the kitchen. And then I heard a man's voice. It was deep, gravelly, and unmistakable. It was Pierce. "We have to be careful, Cass," my father said. His voice sounded strange, slurred almost. "Wilder could be back any time." "Don't worry about him," Cassidy replied. Her voice had a sharp edge I had never heard before. It wasn't the sweet melodic tone she used with me. It was cold. "He's too busy trying to be just like you to ever notice what's right in front of him. Besides, you look like you need to lie down again. That last tea I made for you really took the edge off, didn't it?" I leaned my forehead against the cool marble of the bathroom counter, my eyes squeezed shut. I felt like I was drowning. My wife, my father, my hero, my partner. The two pillars of my existence were crumbling into a pile of ash. I stayed in that bathroom for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 20 minutes. I listened to them move around downstairs. I listened to the front door open and close. I listened to Cassidy humming a tune as she walked up the stairs, oblivious to the fact that I was 10 feet away. When she entered the bedroom, she saw my suitcase. She gasped, a sharp intake of breath that sounded like a strike of a match. I walked out of the bathroom, my face a mask of practiced indifference. I had made a decision in those 20 minutes of darkness. If I confronted her now, she would lie. She would cry. She would call my father, and they would coordinate a story. I would be the crazy, jealous husband, and I would lose everything. To get the truth, I had to become a ghost. "Hey, babe," I said, my voice remarkably steady. "I got in early. I was just taking a shower." She looked pale, her hand clutching her chest. "Wilder, you scared the life out of me. I didn't expect you until tonight." "Surprise," I said, walking over to kiss her cheek. The smell of that cedarwood tobacco was clinging to her hair. It was nauseating. "Where have you been? The house was so quiet when I got here." "Oh, just running errands," she said, her eyes darting toward the hallway. "And your dad stopped by to drop off some paperwork for the trust. He wasn't feeling well, so he rested in the guest room for a bit. I just walked him to his car." She was good. She was so damn good. If I hadn't seen the earring, if I hadn't heard the coldness in her voice just moments before, I would have believed her. She looked concerned, like a dutiful daughter-in-law. "That was nice of you," I said. "He's been working too hard lately. We should have them over for dinner this Sunday. You, me, Dad, and Mom." The mention of my mother, Genevieve, made Cassidy's expression flicker for a split second. A shadow passed over her eyes. Not guilt, but something else. Something like calculation. "That sounds lovely, Wilder. I'll call your mother and set it up." Over the next few days, I lived in a state of hyper-awareness. Every touch from Cassidy felt like a burn. Every "I love you" felt like a slur. I started noticing things I had been blind to for years. I noticed how Genevieve always seemed to know where Cassidy was. I noticed how Pierce, usually a man of sharp wit and endless energy, seemed to be fading. When I visited him at his estate, he seemed foggy. He'd repeat himself. He'd stare at the wall for minutes at a time. "You okay, Dad?" I asked him on Thursday. We were sitting in his study, the room filled with the blueprints of his life's work. He looked at me, his eyes unfocused. I'm tired, Wilder. The tea Cassidy brings over. It helps me sleep, but I feel like I'm waking up in a dream every day. I can't remember the afternoons lately. It's the age, I suppose." My stomach turned. Cassidy was bringing him tea. And he couldn't remember the afternoons. A dark, jagged thought began to take root in my mind. Was it possible? Was it an affair? Or was it something even more sinister? That night, I waited until Cassidy was deep in sleep. I took her phone from the nightstand. I knew her passcode. It was our wedding anniversary. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would wake her. I scrolled through her messages. There was nothing from my father, not a single text. But there was a hidden folder in her photo app, protected by a secondary face ID. I held the phone up to her sleeping face. The lock clicked open. What I saw inside wasn't just evidence of an affair. It was a collection of horror. There were photos of my father, Pierce, slumped over in his armchair, appearing unconscious. In the photos, Cassidy was draped over him, her clothes disheveled, posing in ways that suggested intimacy. But Pierce wasn't hugging her back. His arms were limp. His eyes were closed. In some photos, he looked like a corpse. There were also videos, short clips of Cassidy whispering to herself, practicing lines. "He'll never believe you, Pierce. If you tell Wilder anything, I'll show him these. I'll tell the world the great architect is a predator. You'll lose your legacy, and he'll lose his father." I felt a surge of nausea so violent I had to bolt to the bathroom to keep from retching. She wasn't just cheating. She was framing him. She was destroying an old man's life to hold him hostage. But why? What could she possibly gain from ruining a man who had already treated her like a daughter? I went back to the bedroom and looked at her. Really looked at her. In the moonlight, she looked like an angel. But I knew now that I was sleeping next to a viper. I looked at the phone again, scrolling further back in the hidden folder. And that's when I found the most recent recording. It wasn't a photo. It was an audio file labeled Update 4. I plugged in my earbuds, my hands shaking so violently I almost dropped the phone. I pressed play. "She's doing exactly what you asked," a voice said. It wasn't Cassidy. It was a voice I had heard every day of my life. A voice that had tucked me in at night and taught me about family honor and class. It was Genevieve, my mother. "Good." My mother's voice continued, cold and sharp as a razor blade. "Make sure the photos are clear. I want no doubt in Wilder's mind when the time comes. He needs to see that even the man he worships is flawed. He needs to see that the only person he can truly rely on is me. Is the dosage right? We can't have him waking up while you're positioning him." "It's perfect," Cassidy's voice replied. "He's out for hours. But Genevieve, what if Wilder doesn't leave me? What if he tries to forgive us?" "He won't," my mother snapped. "I've raised him to be a man of principle. Once he sees his wife and his father together, he'll burn it all down. And when he does, I'll be there to catch the pieces. He'll return to the estate, and we can finally get rid of that old fool Pierce. The trust will be ours. The legacy will be ours. Just keep playing your part, Cassidy. Be the grieving, confused wife. Tell him Pierce forced you. Tell him you were scared." The audio ended with a chilling laugh from my mother. I sat on the floor of our walk-in closet, the phone glowing in the dark, my world completely inverted. My mother. My own mother was the architect of this nightmare. She was using my wife to destroy my father, all to test my loyalty and seize control of the family fortune. They were treats, and I was the dog they were trying to train. They weren't just breaking my heart. They were dissecting my soul for sport. I looked at the gold earring still sitting in my jewelry tray, where I had placed it after finding it in the guest room. I picked it up, feeling the sharp point of the post dig into my thumb. The pain was the only thing that felt real. I stood up and walked back to the bed. I placed the phone back on the nightstand, exactly where it had been. I crawled back into bed, lying inches away from the woman who was drugging my father on my mother's orders. I stared at the ceiling, my eyes wide and unblinking in the dark. I didn't feel like the Wilder I was yesterday. That man was dead. I felt a strange, icy calm settle over me. They wanted a performance. I would give them one. They wanted to see if I was a man of principle. They were about to find out exactly what happens when a man of principle is pushed into a corner with nothing left to lose. I reached out and gently stroked Cassidy's hair. She stirred in her sleep, murmuring my name with a smile that used to make me happy. Now, it just fueled the fire. I watched her for a long time, watching the rhythmic rise and fall of her chest, thinking about the tea she made for my father and the scripts my mother wrote for her. The silence of the house felt different now. It wasn't the sound of a lie anymore. It was the sound of a predator waiting in the tall grass. I looked at the digital clock on the bedside table. 3:14 a.m. I got out of bed, moved silently to the kitchen, and opened the cabinet where we kept the fine china. I reached for the heavy crystal bourbon decanter, the one my father had given us as a wedding present. I unscrewed the stopper, the glass grinding softly, and poured a single amber finger of the liquid into a glass, watching the moonlight refract through the crystal and dance across the darkened walls of the room. The crystal felt heavy in my hand, the cold ridges of the decanter biting into my palm as the amber liquid caught the pale lunar glow. I didn't drink it. I just watched it swirl, a miniature whirlpool of gold that mirrored the chaos spinning inside my chest. Downstairs, the house groaned with the settling of wood and stone, a sound I used to find comforting, but now felt like the skeletal rattle of a dying beast. My home was no longer a sanctuary. It was a stage, and I was the only person in the audience who realized the play was a tragedy. I stayed there in the kitchen for a long time, the shadow of the decanter stretching long across the marble island. My mind was a fever of calculations. Every memory I had of the last 6 months was being re-examined through a broken lens. Every weekend visit to the estate, every girls' day Cassidy spent with Genevieve, every time my mother praised Cassidy's devotion to the family. It was all poison. They hadn't just betrayed me. They were trying to rewrite my reality. They wanted to strip me of my father so that I would belong entirely to them. As the sun began to bleed through the blinds, painting the kitchen in jagged streaks of orange and gray, I realized that my survival depended on my ability to lie better than they did. I had to become the man they thought I was, the grieving, oblivious, loyal son. I had to walk into the lion's den every day and smile while I felt the fangs at my throat. When Cassidy finally came downstairs, her hair tousled and her eyes bright with artificial warmth, I was standing by the coffee maker. I had already rinsed the bourbon glass. The air smelled of freshly ground beans, a domestic scent that felt like a mockery. "You're up early, honey," she murmured, wrapping her arms around my waist from behind. Her touch felt like a physical burn, a searing reminder of the hidden folders and the drugged tea. "Couldn't sleep," I said, my voice sounding hollow to my own ears, though she didn't seem to notice. "Just thinking about work and the dinner this Sunday. I want it to be special. Dad hasn't been himself lately, and I think he needs to feel the family close to him." I felt her stiffen for a fraction of a second against my back. It was a tell, a tiny, microscopic glitch in her performance. "That's a wonderful idea, Wilder," she said, her voice regaining its honeyed smoothness. "I'll make sure your mother knows how much this means to you. She's so worried about Pierce, too. We all are." I turned around and looked into her eyes. I searched for a flicker of the woman I had married, the woman I thought was my soulmate, but all I saw was a reflection of my own mask. I realized then that I didn't even know who Cassidy was. Maybe she had always been this person, a mercenary in a sundress, waiting for the highest bidder. And that bidder was my mother. The next few days were a masterclass in psychological endurance. I went to work, I took meetings, I answered emails, and all the while, I was living a double life. Every evening, I would come home and watch her. I watched how she checked her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. I watched the way she handled the kitchen cabinets, looking for the small, unlabeled bottle of liquid she tucked behind the baking soda. On Wednesday, I decided it was time to move. While Cassidy was at her yoga class, I didn't go to the office. Instead, I drove to a small, discreet electronics shop 3 towns over. I didn't want anything that could be traced to my usual accounts. I bought 4 high-definition pinhole cameras, the kind that look like ordinary USB chargers or smoke detector components. I also bought a series of high-fidelity voice recorders. When I got back to the house, I worked with a frantic, silent efficiency. I placed one camera in the guest room, hidden within the slats of the air vent. I placed another in our bedroom, tucked behind the books on the high shelf. But the most important ones were for the estate. Visiting my father had become a ritual of heartbreak. I stopped by on Thursday afternoon, bringing him a box of his favorite pastries from the bakery downtown. Genevieve was in the garden, directing the landscapers with the cold authority of a general. She barely acknowledged me, just a sharp nod and a comment about my tie being crooked. "Go on in, Wilder," she said, her voice echoing off the stone walls. "Your father is in the sunroom. He's had a bit of a foggy morning. Try not to overstimulate him." I found Pierce sitting in a wicker chair, a blanket draped over his legs despite the warmth of the day. He looked smaller than I remembered. The man who had once stood on construction sites and commanded hundreds of workers now looked like a ghost in his own home. His eyes were glazed, staring out at the oak trees without really seeing them. "Hey, Dad," I said, sitting on the ottoman at his feet. He blinked, slowly turning his head toward me. "Wilder? Is it Sunday already?" "No, Dad. It's Thursday. I just wanted to check in on you." He reached out a trembling hand and patted my shoulder. "Good lad. You're a good lad. Cassidy was here earlier. She brought that tea. It makes my head feel like it's filled with cotton. I can't seem to find my keys, Wilder. I had them in my hand, and then nothing." I felt a lump of hot rage rising in my throat. My mother was standing just outside the glass doors, her silhouette a dark blot against the green lawn. She was watching us. She was waiting for the cotton to take over completely. "Don't worry about the keys, Dad," I whispered, leaning in close so the wind wouldn't carry my voice to the garden. "I'll help you find everything. I promise." While he drifted back into his drug-induced lethargy, I moved through the sunroom. I hid a tiny recorder inside the base of a heavy floor lamp. I placed another one behind a framed photo of our family on the mantel, a photo taken 10 years ago, when we all looked so happy, so untainted. I looked at my mother's face in the picture. Even then, her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. How had I missed it for so long? The build-up to the Sunday dinner felt like the slow climb of a roller coaster toward a vertical drop. Every conversation with my mother was a minefield. She started dropping hints about Pierce's mental state, weaving a narrative of dementia and predatory behavior. "It's so tragic, Wilder," she said over the phone on Friday night. "The way he looks at Cassidy sometimes. It's not right. I've caught him trying to touch her hand or making inappropriate comments. I think he's losing his inhibitions. We might have to think about more permanent arrangements for his care, for everyone's safety." "Safety, Mom?" I asked, gripping the steering wheel of my car until my knuckles turned white. "He's 70. He can barely walk to the kitchen." "You'd be surprised what a man in that state is capable of when he's confused," she replied, her tone dripping with mock sympathy. "Cassidy is being so brave about it. She doesn't want to hurt your feelings, but she's told me she started to feel uncomfortable being alone with him. We have to protect the family, Wilder, above all else." I hung up without saying goodbye. The test was nearing its climax. They were prepping me for the big reveal. They wanted me to be primed with suspicion so that when Cassidy finally confessed, or when I caught them, I would immediately side with my mother. Saturday night was the hardest. Cassidy was extra affectionate, as if she were trying to compensate for the betrayal she was about to unleash. She made my favorite dinner, lasagna, and talked about our future. She talked about having children, about moving to a bigger house, about the trips we would take. "I just want us to be happy, Wilder," she said, her eyes welling with fake tears. "I feel like there's a cloud over this family lately. I hope after tomorrow, everything can just be out in the open. I hate secrets." "Me too, Cassidy," I said, and for the first time in days, I meant it. I hate secrets more than anything. I didn't sleep that night. I spent the hours in the dark, watching the feed from the cameras on my laptop, which I had encrypted and hidden within a work folder. Most of the footage was mundane. Empty rooms, the shadow of a passing car. But then, around 11 p.m., my father's sunroom camera picked up a movement. It was my mother. She was walking through the room in her silk robe, looking like a queen inspecting her domain. She stopped in front of my father's chair and picked up a glass he had left behind. She sniffed it, then poured the remains into a potted plant. She looked at the framed photo on the mantel, the one where I had hidden the recorder, and she actually smirked. She whispered something, a single sentence that froze my blood. "Almost there, Pierce. Just a few more days, and you'll be exactly where you belong." She turned off the lamp, plunging the room into infrared grayscale. The morning of the Sunday brunch arrived with a heavy, oppressive heat. The humidity in the air was so thick you could almost feel it on your skin, like a damp shroud. Cassidy spent hours getting ready, choosing a dress that was modest yet soft, the perfect outfit for a victim. We drove to the estate in silence. I kept my hand on the gear shift, and she kept hers on my thigh. It felt like a trap. When we arrived, the estate looked beautiful. The grass was manicured, the fountains were bubbling, and the smell of jasmine was everywhere. It was a picture-perfect American dream, concealing a rotten, hollow core. My mother greeted us at the door with a hug that felt like a snake's coil. "Wilder, darling. Cassidy, you look radiant. Come in, come in. Pierce is in the dining room. He's having a good day, thank goodness." We walked into the dining room. The table was set with the family's silver and crystal. My father was already seated at the head of the table. He looked better than he had on Thursday, his eyes clearer, his posture straighter. For a moment, my heart soared. Maybe the drugs were wearing off. Maybe he was fighting back. "Wilder, Cassidy," he said, his voice booming with a phantom of his old strength. "Sit down. Let's have a drink before the food comes out." "I'll get the drinks," Cassidy said quickly, stepping toward the sideboard. "Pierce, you like your bourbon with a splash of water, right?" "Indeed I do, my dear," he said, smiling at her. It was a pure, grandfatherly smile, filled with nothing but kindness. Watching Cassidy return that smile while reaching for the decanter was like watching a slow-motion car crash. I watched her hands. They were steady. She poured the bourbon, then reached for a white pitcher of water. But as she poured, I saw her thumb press a small button on the underside of the pitcher's handle. A tiny stream of clear liquid, different from the water, dropped into my father's glass. My mother saw it too. She didn't look away. She didn't flinch. She just picked up her own glass of wine and toasted the air. "To family," Genevieve said, "and to the truths that bind us." We sat through the meal. It was an exercise in agony. I watched my father's eyes begin to glaze over again within 20 minutes. I watched him struggle to hold his fork. I watched Cassidy help him, leaning in close, her hand lingering on his arm, her eyes constantly darting to mine to see if I was noticing the intimacy. "Wilder," my mother said, her voice dripping with calculated concern, "why don't you go into the kitchen and check on the dessert? I think the staff might need a hand with the souffle. Cassidy, why don't you help Pierce back to his study? He looks like he needs a lie down." This was it, the move, the separation. "Sure, Mom," I said, standing up. I felt like I was stepping off a cliff. I walked toward the kitchen, but I didn't stay there. I looped back through the servants' hallway, moving silently over the plush carpets. I reached the door to my father's study just as Cassidy was leading him inside. I pressed my ear to the heavy oak. "There you go, Pierce," I heard Cassidy say. Her voice was different now. The sweetness was gone. It was cold, clinical. "Just sit back. You're so tired, aren't you?" I don't feel right, Cassidy," my father whispered. "The room is spinning. I need Wilder." "Wilder isn't here, Pierce, but I am. I'm right here." I heard the sound of a zipper. I heard the rustle of fabric. My stomach lurched. I gripped the door handle, my knuckles white, my heart screaming at me to burst in and end it. But I remembered the recording. I remembered the update 4. If I went in now, I was just a witness to a scene they had staged. I needed the full confession. I needed the why. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened the app for the hidden cameras. The feed from the study popped up in grainy color. I watched as Cassidy pulled her dress off her shoulders and leaned over my father, who was now almost completely unconscious, his head lolling to the side. She took out her own phone and started taking pictures. She was positioning his hand on her waist. She was creating the affair in real time. And then, the door to the study opened. Not the door I was standing behind, but the side door that led to my mother's private sitting room. Genevieve walked in. She didn't look shocked. She didn't look angry. She looked like a director walking onto a set. "The lighting is wrong, Cassidy," my mother said, her voice echoing through my phone's speakers. "Move the lamp closer. We need to make sure Wilder can see the wedding ring on Pierce's hand while he's touching you. It adds that extra layer of betrayal, don't you think?" "He's almost out, Genevieve," Cassidy said, sounding breathless. "How much longer do we have to do this? I'm tired of smelling like an old man's aftershave." "Just one more set of photos," my mother replied, walking over to my father and tilting his chin up with a brutal, cold finger. "Look at him, the great Pierce Vance, reduced to a drooling prop in his own ruin. He never thought I was smart enough to run the firm. He thought I was just a social asset." "Well, who's the asset now, Pierce?" She turned to Cassidy. "Once Wilder sees these, I'll tell him I've known for weeks. I'll tell him I caught you two before, but was too ashamed to say anything. He'll turn to me. He'll give me the power of attorney over the estate just to keep the scandal quiet. And you. You'll get your payout and disappear to Europe like we agreed. Everyone wins." "Except Wilder," Cassidy murmured, though she didn't sound particularly sad about it. "Wilder will have the most important thing of all," Genevieve said, a terrifying smile spreading across her face. "He'll have his mother, the only person who truly loves him." I leaned against the wall in the hallway, the phone shaking in my hand. I had it. I had the whole thing. The drugging, the staging, the motive. I had the betrayal of a wife and the psychopathic obsession of a mother. I felt a cold, hard stone settle in my gut. The pain was gone, replaced by a clarity that was sharper than any knife. I wasn't just going to leave. I wasn't just going to divorce her. I was going to dismantle their lives piece by piece, just like they had tried to do to mine. I took a deep breath, straightened my jacket, and tucked the phone back into my pocket. I turned the corner and walked back toward the dining room, my footsteps heavy and deliberate. I found my mother standing by the window, looking out at the estate with a look of supreme satisfaction. "Everything okay with the dessert, darling?" she asked, not even turning around. "Everything is perfect, Mom," I said, my voice as cold as the bourbon I hadn't drunk. "In fact, I think it's time we all had a little talk. I've decided to make a toast, a real one." She turned then, her eyebrows arching in surprise. "Oh, what for?" "For the truth," I said, staring her straight in the eyes. "Because the truth is finally out in the open, and I think everyone should see it." I saw a flicker of doubt cross her face for the very first time. It was small, a tiny ripple in the water, but it was there. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, I turned toward the study door and raised my hand, my fingers hovering just inches from the wood, ready to shatter the silence they had worked so hard to maintain. My hand hovered over the polished oak of the study door, my knuckles white and trembling with a cocktail of adrenaline and pure, unadulterated loathing. I could feel the vibrations of their voices through the wood, the conspiratorial whispers of two women who had traded my father's dignity and my own heart for a chance at a bank account and a crown. Inside that room, a fake crime was being staged, a scene designed to be my breaking point. But as I stood there, I realized I wasn't the one who was going to break. The man who walked into this house an hour ago, the man who still hoped for a misunderstanding, who still clung to the shreds of his marriage, That man was a ghost now. I withdrew my hand. I didn't burst in. I didn't give them the satisfaction of a panicked reaction. Instead, I took a long, jagged breath and smoothed the front of my suit jacket. I needed to be the ultimate actor. I needed to play the role of the shattered sun so perfectly that they wouldn't see the noose I was tightening around their necks until they were already swinging. I turned away from the door and walked back into the grand hallway. I made sure my footsteps were heavy, intentionally loud enough to alert them that someone was coming. I heard the frantic rustle of silk and the soft thud of a chair being adjusted. By the time I reached the dining room, I saw my mother, Genevieve, standing by the sideboard, her face a mask of practiced concern. "Wilder," she called out, her voice pitched with that fake fluttering anxiety that used to make me feel protective. "Is that you? Where have you been? I thought I heard noises from the study." "I was just looking for a bottle of water, Mom," I said, my voice thick with a forced tremor. I allowed my eyes to look red, a byproduct of the sheer rage I was suppressing. "Is everything okay? You look pale." "It's your father, darling," she said, stepping toward me and placing a cold, claw-like hand on my arm. "I went to check on him and Cassidy, and I saw something. Oh, Wilder, I don't know how to tell you this. My heart is just breaking for you." She was leaning into the script. She wanted me to go in there and witness the shame. She wanted to be the one to comfort me as I watched my world go up in flames. "What is it?" I whispered, playing along. "What did you see?" "Just go in, see for yourself, but please, try to stay calm. He's not himself. The dementia. It's turned him into a stranger." I nodded slowly, like a man walking toward his own execution. I walked back toward the study door, and this time, I pushed it open. The scene was exactly as I had seen on the camera. My father, Pierce, was slumped in his leather wingback chair, his eyes half closed and glazed over with the effects of the sedatives. Cassidy was perched on the arm of the chair, her dress pulled low over one shoulder, her hand resting on my father's chest. When the door swung open, she let out a theatrical gasp and scrambled to fix her clothing, looking at me with a face full of manufactured guilt. "Wilder," she cried, her voice cracking. It's not what it looks like. I was just..." He was confused, and then he grabbed me, and I didn't know what to do. She started to sob, dry, hollow heaves that would have fooled me a week ago. Behind me, I could hear my mother's footsteps, the slow, steady approach of the predator coming in for the kill. "Pierce, how could you?" Genevieve's voice boomed from the doorway, filled with righteous indignation. "In our own home, with your son's wife?" I didn't look at my mother. I didn't look at Cassidy. I walked straight to my father. I knelt in front of him, ignoring the two vultures circling above us. I took his hand. It was cold, limp, and smelled faintly of the floral soap Cassidy used. "Dad?" I whispered. "Can you hear me?" Pierce's eyes flickered. He tried to focus on me, but the tea was too strong. He looked like a man trapped behind a thick sheet of glass, screaming in silence. A single tear tracked down his weathered cheek. He knew. Even in his drugged state, he knew what was happening, and he was helpless to stop it. The sight of his humiliation, his absolute vulnerability in the face of his own family's cruelty, was the final spark I needed. "Wilder, get away from him," Cassidy sobbed, reaching for my shoulder. "He's dangerous. He's been saying such horrible things to me. He told me he'd cut you out of the will if I didn't." I stood up slowly and turned to face her. The sheer effort of not wrapping my hands around her throat was enough to make my vision blur. "He said that, did he?" "Yes," she wailed, burying her face in her hands. "He's been obsessed with me for months. I was so scared to tell you. I didn't want to break your heart. Your mother. She caught us once before, didn't you, Genevieve?" "I did," my mother said, her voice grave. She walked over and put her arm around Cassidy's shaking shoulders. I tried to protect you, Wilder. I hoped it would stop. But Pierce, he's lost his soul. He's a sick man. I looked at them both, the two women who had shared my table, my bed, and my secrets. They stood there, united in a lie so grotesque it felt like a physical weight in the room. They were waiting for me to explode. They were waiting for me to banish Pierce, to sign the papers, to hand over the keys to the kingdom. I see, I said, my voice dropping to a low, icy register. So this is the truth then. It's the horrible, ugly truth, Genevieve sighed. But don't worry, darling. We're here now. We'll handle the lawyers. We'll handle the scandal. You just need to rest. You need to come back to the estate where you're safe. You're right, Mom, I said, a slow, dark smile finally breaking across my face, a smile that made Cassidy's sobbing stop abruptly. I do need to handle this, but we're not doing it in secret. This family is about legacy, isn't it? It's about truth. What are you talking about? Cassidy asked, her eyes narrowing as she sensed the shift in the air. Next week is the Vance Architecture 50th Anniversary Gala, I said, my voice growing stronger with every word. Everyone will be there. The board, the press, the city's elite. Dad was supposed to give the keynote speech, but since he's so unwell, I think we should turn that night into something else. A tribute to the family. A public showing of our strength. My mother's eyes lit up with greed. She saw a chance to solidify her power in front of the entire world. A gala? Wilder. Do you think you're up for that? The stress. I've never felt more focused in my life, Mom, I said, looking her straight in the eye. I want to show everyone what we're really made of. I want to honor the work you and Cassidy have done to keep this family together. Wilder, I don't know. Cassidy started, but I cut her off with a sharp, cold look. You'll be there, Cassidy, in your best dress, standing right by my side. We're going to show the world the unspoken side of the Vance family. It's going to be a night that no one will ever forget. For the next 6 days, I was a ghost in a suit. I didn't sleep in the same bed as Cassidy. I told her I needed space to process the trauma, which she gladly accepted, thinking I was simply mourning my father's betrayal. I moved into the guest room, the very room where I had found her earring, and I spent every waking hour with a team of private investigators and tech specialists I had hired using an offshore account. I didn't just want a divorce. I wanted an exorcism. I watched the footage from the sunroom and the study over and over again. I watched my mother plan the dosages of the sedatives. I watched Cassidy rehearse her cries in the mirror. I watched them laugh together about how easy I was to manipulate. Every laugh was a nail in their coffins. I also visited Pierce every day. I stopped the tea service. I hired a private nurse, a woman I knew from my college days who couldn't be bought, to stay with him 24/7. Within 3 days, the fog began to lift. Wilder, my father whispered on Friday afternoon, his voice rasping but clear. He was sitting up in bed, his eyes sharp with a pain that went deeper than any drug. I didn't. I would never. I know, Dad, I said, squeezing his hand. I know everything. I heard the recordings. I saw the photos they took of you. Your mother. She always hated that I built something she couldn't control. She wanted the firm to be her playground. But I never thought she'd use you like this. I never thought she'd destroy your happiness just to spite me. She didn't destroy it, Dad. She just revealed what it was built on. Sand. But the storm is coming, and I'm the one bringing it. I spent the rest of the day coordinating with the event planners for the gala. I made a special request for the visual presentation that was to play behind the podium during the keynote. I told them I had a surprise video, a tribute to the women of the Vance legacy. I gave them a thumb drive and told them it was to be played only when I gave the signal. Saturday night, the night before the gala, Cassidy tried to come into my room. She was wearing a sheer silk robe, her hair down, her eyes soft with that practiced vulnerability. Wilder, she whispered, leaning against the door frame. I miss you. Can't we just start the healing tonight? I hate that he came between us. I hate what he did to me. I looked at her, and all I saw was a hollow shell. A woman who had been willing to drug an elderly man and gaslight her husband for a lifestyle she didn't earn. Tomorrow, Cassidy, I said, my voice flat. Everything changes tomorrow. Go to sleep. You'll need your energy for the gala. You're being so cold, she pouted, a flicker of genuine irritation crossing her face. I'm the victim here, remember? I remember exactly who the victim is, I said, turning back to my laptop. Get out. The morning of the gala arrived with a cold, biting wind that swept through the city. I spent the morning at the estate, helping my father into his tuxedo. He was weak, but he was standing. He looked at himself in the mirror, his face a mask of grim determination. Are you sure about this, son? He asked. There will be no going back. The Vance name. It will be dragged through the mud. The Vance name is already in the mud, Dad, I replied, adjusting his bow tie. We're just finally letting the world see the dirt. It's better to be a ruined man with the truth than a successful man living a lie. He nodded, a spark of the old Pierce Vance returning to his eyes. Then let's finish it. The venue was a glass-walled ballroom overlooking the river, filled with hundreds of the city's most powerful people. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume, the same scents that had once meant home to me. My mother was in her element, gliding through the crowd in a floor-length emerald gown, accepting condolences for Pierce's unfortunate health and playing the role of the devoted, grieving matriarch. Cassidy was by my side, her hand clamped onto my arm like a vice. She was wearing a white dress, the color of innocence, and smiling at the cameras. Every time a photographer flashed a light, she would lean into me, a perfect, devoted wife. Smile, Wilder, she whispered through gritted teeth. People are looking. Don't ruin this for us. I'm not ruining anything, Cassidy, I said, looking at the large screen at the front of the room. I'm making it perfect. The dinner was served, the wine flowed, and the chatter reached a fever pitch. Finally, it was time for the keynote. The chairman of the board stood up and approached the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice echoing through the silent room. Tonight we celebrate 50 years of the Vance legacy. Usually this speech would be given by the man who started it all, Pierce Vance. But as many of you know, Pierce is facing some private health challenges. In his place, his son and the future of this company, Wilder Vance, will speak. The room erupted in applause. I felt Cassidy's grip tighten on my arm. Go on, honey, she whispered. Make us proud. I walked toward the stage, each step feeling lighter than the last. I could see my mother in the front row, her face glowing with triumph. She thought this was the moment she won. She thought I was going to stand up there and officially take the reins, with her as the power behind the throne. I reached the podium and adjusted the microphone. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. I looked out at the faces, the people who had known my family for decades. I saw my father sitting in the very back, obscured by the shadows, his eyes fixed on me. Good evening, I began, my voice steady and clear, cutting through the heavy air of the ballroom. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration of a legacy built on stone and steel. But over the last few weeks, I've learned that a legacy built on lies is nothing more than a prison. I spent my life believing in the people in this front row. I believed in loyalty. I believed in family honor. I saw my mother's smile falter. She shifted in her seat, her eyes narrowing. Cassidy, standing to the side of the stage, took a step forward, her brow furrowed in confusion. I used to think that the greatest betrayal was a secret affair, I continued, my voice gaining a hard, rhythmic edge. But I was wrong. The greatest betrayal is when the people who are supposed to love you the most decide to treat your life like a chess game, when they decide that your heart is a small price to pay for control. I wanted to share a story with you tonight, a story about a test of character. Wilder, what are you doing? my mother hissed from the front row, her voice barely audible to the crowd but clear to me. I ignored her. I looked at the tech booth and gave a single, sharp nod. "I'd like you all to look at the screen," I said, my voice booming through the speakers. "I'd like to introduce you to the real architects of the Vance legacy." The lights in the ballroom dimmed. The massive screen behind me flickered to life. But it wasn't the slideshow of old buildings and black and white photos of my father on construction sites. It was the video from the study. The audio kicked in, loud and crystal clear. The entire room heard my mother's cold, sharp voice. "Is it done? Did you get the photos? I need to know if my son is man enough to leave a woman like you." The room gasped, a collective, suffocating sound that felt like the air being sucked out of the ballroom. On the screen, the image shifted to Cassidy posing over my father's unconscious body, her face cold and clinical as she checked her reflection in the mirror before taking a photo. Then came the audio of the update 4. "He never thought I was smart enough to run the firm." Well, who's the asset now, Pierce? I stood at the podium, my arms crossed, watching the screen. I didn't look at the crowd. I looked at my mother. Her face had turned a ghastly shade of gray. She tried to stand up, but her legs seemed to give way, and she slumped back into her chair, her mouth hanging open in a silent scream of horror. Cassidy was frozen on the side of the stage, her hands over her mouth, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. The socialites she had spent months trying to impress were now looking at her with a disgust so potent it was almost visible. The video played on, showing the tea being prepared, showing the laughter, showing the cold, calculated destruction of a man's life. When the screen finally went black, the silence that followed was more deafening than the applause had been. I stepped back to the microphone. "That," I said, my voice echoing in the stillness, "is the unspoken journal of this family. That is the test I was supposed to pass." I reached into my pocket and pulled out 2 envelopes. I walked to the edge of the stage. I dropped the first one, the divorce papers, at Cassidy's feet. She didn't even look at them. She was too busy staring at the hundreds of people who were now filming her with their phones. I walked down the steps and stood in front of my mother. I handed her the second envelope. "This is an eviction notice for the estate," I said, my voice low so only she could hear it. "And a formal notice of your removal from the board. You wanted to know if I was man enough to handle a betrayal, Mom. I think I just showed you." I turned my back on her and walked toward the exit. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea, their faces a blur of shock and awe. I didn't stop to talk to anyone. I didn't look back at the wreckage I had left behind. I reached the back of the room where my father was waiting. He stood up, his hand shaking as he reached out to me. I took it, and together we walked out of the glass-walled ballroom and into the biting cold of the night. As we reached the car, I looked up at the sky. The moon was sharp and bright, casting long, clean shadows across the pavement. For the first time in months, the air felt clear. The scent of cedarwood and lilies was gone, replaced by the honest, biting smell of the winter wind. I opened the door for my father and then climbed into the driver's seat. I sat there for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel, feeling the silence of the car. It was a different kind of silence now. It wasn't a lie. It wasn't a fuse. I looked at my father, who was staring out the window at the city he had built, his face reflecting the passing streetlights. "Where to, Wilder?" he asked softly. I shifted the car into gear, the engine humming a steady, powerful rhythm beneath us. "Somewhere quiet, Dad," I said, my voice finally finding its peace. Somewhere where the silence actually means something. I pulled away from the curb, leaving the lights of the gala and the ruins of my old life in the rearview mirror, focusing only on the stretch of road that lay ahead, dark and wide, and finally, truly mine. The waves didn't care about my family's reputation. They didn't care about the millions of dollars that were currently being frozen in legal disputes, or the headlines that were likely screaming my name across the country. As I stood on the edge of the Atlantic, the salt spray stinging my cheeks, I realized that nature is the only thing that's truly honest. It doesn't put on a mask. It doesn't drug you to test your loyalty. It just is. I watched my phone sink into the dark surf, the last link to a life built on a foundation of shifting sand. For a second, the water glowed with a faint, ghostly light from the screen, a final notification, a final live from Cassidy or Genevieve, and then it was gone. Total, absolute darkness. Before I go on, I want to ask you something, and I really want you to think about this before you answer in the comments. If you found out your entire life was a script written by someone who claimed to love you, would you stay for the finale? Or would you burn the theater down and walk away? I see a lot of people talking about forgiveness and family first. But at what point does family become a poison? Let me know your thoughts. I'm reading every single one of them tonight. And if you're finding strength in this story, make sure to subscribe. We're building a community of people who are done with the lies. I walked back toward the cottage, my boots sinking into the wet sand. The firelight through the window was a soft, flickering amber pulse, the only heartbeat in the night. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and the faint, metallic tang of the ocean. My father, Pierce, was already asleep in the guest room. I stood by his door for a moment, listening to the steady, rhythmic sound of his breathing. It was the sound of a man who was no longer a prisoner in his own mind. He wasn't the distinguished architect or the social asset tonight. He was just my father, and for the first time in years, that was enough. I sat down in the heavy wooden chair by the hearth, watching the embers die down to a deep, glowing crimson. My mind drifted back to Cassidy. I wondered where she was at this exact moment. Was she back at our house, frantically packing her designer bags before the locks were changed? Or was she with my mother, the two of them huddled together like cornered animals, trying to find a way to spin this disaster? The realization hit me then. I didn't hate them anymore. Hate is an active emotion. It requires energy, a connection, a tether. What I felt now was a profound, hollow indifference. They had tried to turn me into a version of myself that they could control, a man who would choose a mother's approval over a father's life. They failed. In trying to test my character, they ended up revealing their own lack of it. It was the ultimate backfire. The next morning, the sun rose over the water in a violent explosion of pink and gold. There were no cameras, no gala dresses, no scripted smiles. I made breakfast, simple eggs and toast, and sat on the porch with Pierce. We didn't talk about the legal war that was about to begin. We didn't talk about the divorce decree sitting on the floor of a ballroom 3 hours away. "You know, Wilder," Pierce said, looking out at the horizon where the sea met the sky. "The firm, the money, the estate. I spent 40 years thinking those were the things that made a Vance, but looking at you now, I realize I was wrong. A legacy isn't what you build out of stone. It's what you refuse to let break you." I reached out and gripped his hand. It was steady. "We're going to be fine, Dad. Just us. No more loyalty tests. No more tea." He laughed, a dry, rusty sound that felt like the first warm day after a long winter. "No more tea. I think I'll stick to black coffee from now on." As the days turned into weeks, the silence of the cottage became my sanctuary. I hired a legal team that specialized in high-asset divorces and corporate fraud. I gave them the thumb drive, the full, unedited recordings, and told them to show no mercy. Genevieve tried to call from different numbers, leaving voicemails that shifted from tearful pleas for family unity to venomous threats about cutting me out of the inheritance. I deleted them without listening to the end. Cassidy sent a long handwritten letter claiming she was a victim of my mother's psychological abuse and that she still loved me. I burned it in the hearth without reading past the first paragraph. They were still trying to play the game, but I had already left the table. The unspoken journal was finally closed. I realized that my revenge wasn't the public shaming at the gala, though that had been a necessary clearing of the air. My real revenge was my happiness. It was the fact that I could wake up every morning and know exactly who was in the house with me. It was the fact that I could look in the mirror and see a man who wasn't a puppet. I want to end this by speaking directly to anyone out there who feels like they're living in a house of mirrors. You are not crazy for feeling like something is wrong. You're not disloyal for questioning the people who treat you like a pawn. Sometimes, the only way to save the person you're supposed to be is to let go of the people everyone else expects you to be. It's a long road back to yourself, and the silence along the way can be terrifying. But I promise you, once you get there, the view is incredible. I'm sitting here now, watching the tide come in, and for the first time in my life, I don't feel like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. The silence isn't a lie anymore. It's just peace. And peace is the only legacy worth keeping. Thank you for walking through this darkness with me. If this story touched you, or if it gave you the courage to look at your own life a little more closely, please share it. You never know who might need to hear that it's okay to walk away. Comment below with the word truth if you're ready to start your own new chapter. I'll see you in the next one. I stood up, stretched my aching muscles, and looked back at the cottage. Pierce was standing in the doorway, waving me in for lunch. I smiled, a real unforced smile that reached my eyes, and started walking back toward the house. The wind was at my back, the sand was firm beneath my feet, and for the first time in my 32 years, I knew exactly where I was going.